The phone rang while I was folding laundry in our sunlit bedroom, the sound cutting through the peaceful Tuesday afternoon silence. I almost didn't answer when I saw the unfamiliar number, but something made me swipe to accept the call. The woman's voice on the other end was clear, professional, and about to destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. "Hello, is this Sarah Chen?" she asked. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I believe you're married to my ex-husband, Marcus Chen, the man who told you I died in a tragic accident 3 years ago." The basket of warm clothes slipped from my hands, clean shirts and folded jeans scattering across our hardwood floor. My legs gave out, and I sank onto the edge of our king-sized bed, the bed I shared with a man who had apparently built our entire relationship on an impossible lie. Rebecca Martinez wasn't dead. She was very much alive, calling me from her office in Denver, and she was about to reveal that the man I'd loved and trusted for 4 years was someone I'd never really known at all. The grieving widower who had won my heart with his vulnerability and devotion to his late wife's memory had never been a widower at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah Chen, though that wasn't always my last name. 4 months ago, I was Sarah Martinez, a confident 29-year-old marketing specialist living what I thought was a beautiful love story in Austin, Texas. I had everything I'd ever dreamed of: a successful career at a growing tech company, a gorgeous craftsman-style home in the trendy South Lamar neighborhood, and a husband who seemed almost too good to be true. Looking back now, that last part should have been my first warning sign. I grew up in a middle-class family in Round Rock, just outside Austin. My parents, Elena and Robert Martinez, had immigrated from Mexico in the 1980s and built a life centered around hard work, family loyalty, and absolute honesty. My father managed a construction crew while my mother worked as a bilingual teacher at the local elementary school. They taught me and my younger brother, Carlos, that integrity was the foundation of everything worthwhile in life. After graduating from UT Austin with a degree in communications, I landed my dream job at TechFlow Solutions, a rapidly expanding software company that developed customer relationship management systems for small businesses. I loved the creative challenges of marketing emerging technology, and I was good at it. By age 27, I'd been promoted to senior marketing specialist with my own team and a salary that allowed me to buy my first house. My personal life, however, had been a series of disappointments. Austin's dating scene felt endless but shallow, full of guys who wanted casual relationships or were still figuring out their lives. I'd started to wonder if I was too picky, too focused on my career, or just unlucky when it came to finding genuine connection. That all changed on a rainy Thursday evening in March when I met Marcus Chen at a coffee shop near my office. I'd ducked into Brew and Bean to escape a sudden downpour, my laptop bag clutched against my chest as I shook raindrops from my dark hair. The place was packed with other weather refugees, every table occupied except for one small corner spot where a man with kind brown eyes and an apologetic smile was gathering his papers. "Please take the table," he said, standing as I approached. "I was just leaving anyway." "Are you sure? I can wait," I replied, noting how he carefully organized his documents into a leather portfolio, even soaked from the rain. I could tell he was handsome in an understated way, with black hair that curled slightly when wet and laugh lines that suggested he smiled often. "I insist, but maybe you could let me buy you a coffee as compensation for monopolizing the last table during a storm." That first conversation lasted 3 hours. Marcus told me he was a financial consultant who had relocated to Austin from Portland 6 months earlier, looking for a fresh start after losing his wife Rebecca in a car accident. The way he spoke about her was heartbreaking and beautiful, full of love but also acceptance of his loss. "She always said Austin seemed like the kind of place where people went to reinvent themselves," he explained, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "After she died, I needed to find somewhere that felt like possibility instead of just memories. I was moved by his openness about grief, his willingness to be vulnerable with a complete stranger. Most men I'd dated kept their emotions carefully, guarded, but Marcus spoke about love and loss with remarkable maturity. He asked thoughtful questions about my work, my family, my dreams for the future. When the rain finally stopped and we prepared to leave, I found myself hoping he'd ask for my number. He did, and 3 days later, we had our first official date at a small Italian restaurant in downtown Austin. Marcus was unlike anyone I'd ever dated. He brought me flowers on our second date, not expensive roses, but a simple bouquet of sunflowers, because he'd remembered me mentioning they were my favorite. He listened when I talked about work challenges and offered genuine advice rather than trying to fix everything immediately. When I introduced him to my parents after we'd been dating for 2 months, my usually skeptical father pulled me aside afterward to say he'd never seen me so happy. "He looks at you like you're precious," my mother observed in Spanish, squeezing my hand as we cleaned dishes together. "Like he knows how lucky he is." Marcus integrated into my life seamlessly. He met my college friends and charmed them with his quick wit and genuine interest in their stories. He attended my company's annual picnic and impressed my colleagues by remembering details from conversations weeks earlier. He even learned to make my grandmother's enchilada recipe, carefully writing down each step as my mom guided him through the process. The only area where Marcus remained somewhat private was his past. He had few photos from his life before Austin, explaining that most of his belongings had been lost in a storage unit fire during his move from Portland. He didn't talk much about his family, saying his parents had died young and he'd been an only child. His previous social circle had been too connected to Rebecca's memory for him to maintain those friendships after her death. I understood his need for space around painful topics. Grief was personal, and I respected his process of healing while building something new with me. Our relationship progressed naturally and beautifully. We spent lazy Sunday mornings exploring Austin's farmers markets, collecting ingredients for elaborate brunches we'd cook together. Marcus introduced me to hiking, and we'd drive out to the hill country on weekends, discovering hidden trails and scenic overlooks where we'd picnic and talk for hours about everything and nothing. He was affectionate without being possessive, supportive of my career ambitions, and refreshingly honest about his own goals and fears. When I received a major promotion at work, he surprised me with a weekend trip to New Orleans to celebrate. When he struggled with difficult clients at his consulting firm, I held him while he vented his frustrations, feeling grateful that he trusted me with his professional anxieties. After 18 months of dating, Marcus proposed during a weekend getaway to Marfa, Texas. We'd been watching the sunset from the balcony of our boutique hotel when he got down on one knee with a vintage emerald ring that had belonged to his grandmother. "Sarah, you've shown me that it's possible to love again without betraying the past," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Will you marry me and help me build a future that honors where we've both come from?" I said yes through happy tears, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. Our engagement lasted 8 months, time we spent planning a wedding that reflected both of our personalities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus insisted on including small tributes to Rebecca's memory, which I found touching rather than threatening. He placed a single white rose on the altar in her honor and wore cufflinks that had been her gift to him on their first anniversary. "I want her to be part of this celebration," he explained when I asked about the rose. "She would have loved you, Sarah. You both have the same generous heart and terrible taste in romantic comedies." The wedding itself was perfect. We married at Laguna Gloria, an art museum with stunning gardens overlooking Lake Austin. My extended family flew in from across Texas and Mexico, filling the ceremony with warmth and celebration. Marcus's guest list was smaller, composed mainly of colleagues and the few close friends he'd made since moving to Austin. During our vows, Marcus spoke about second chances and the courage required to love fully after loss. I promised to honor his past while building our future together. Our first dance was to At Last by Etta James, and I felt the truth of those lyrics in my bones as Marcus held me close, his lips brushing my ear as he whispered how much he loved me. We honeymooned in Costa Rica, spending 2 weeks exploring rainforests and beaches, learning to surf and zip line through canopies. Marcus was playful and romantic, taking hundreds of photos and insisting we document every adventure. He bought me a silver bracelet from a local artisan, engraved with the coordinates of the beach where we'd watched our first Costa Rican sunset. "So you'll always be able to find your way back to this moment," he said as he fastened the clasp around my wrist. Married life with Marcus exceeded even my highest expectations. We settled into our home in South Lamar, a 1920s craftsman that we'd bought together and spent months renovating. Marcus had an eye for design and a surprising talent for woodworking, building custom shelves for my extensive book collection and refinishing the original hardwood floors himself. We hosted dinner parties for friends, spent quiet evenings reading together on our front porch swing, and talked about starting a family within the next few years. Marcus was attentive and romantic, still bringing me flowers every Friday and leaving sweet notes in my lunch bag when I had particularly stressful weeks at work. He'd established himself as a successful independent financial consultant, working primarily with small business owners who needed help with retirement planning and investment strategies. His office was in a downtown building, and he often worked late or traveled to meet clients in surrounding cities. I admired his dedication and entrepreneurial spirit. The only minor concern I had was Marcus's reluctance to discuss his specific work details. When I asked about particularly difficult days or interesting client situations, he'd give vague responses and change the subject. I attributed this to professional discretion and client confidentiality requirements. Marcus also remained somewhat isolated from his past life. He had no contact with friends from Portland, no colleagues from previous jobs who stayed in touch, no extended family members who called or visited. When I asked about this isolation, he explained that starting over had required clean breaks from reminders of his life with Rebecca. "Sometimes healing means letting go of everything connected to the pain," he said, when I gently suggested he might benefit from reconnecting with old friends. "I have you now, and your family has welcomed me so completely. I don't need anything else." His devotion felt romantic rather than concerning. I'd never been with someone who was so completely present in our relationship, so focused on building our life together without the distractions of complex social obligations or family drama. Our second year of marriage brought new adventures and deeper intimacy. We adopted a rescue dog named Luna, a golden retriever mix who became Marcus's constant companion during his work-from-home days. We started talking seriously about having children, discussing names and parenting philosophies during long walks around our neighborhood. Marcus surprised me with a trip to Italy for our second anniversary, where we spent 2 weeks exploring Tuscany and the Amalfi Coast. He'd researched every restaurant and historic site, creating detailed itineraries that balanced must-see attractions with spontaneous discoveries. In Positano, he arranged for a private cooking class where we learned to make fresh pasta from a grandmother who spoke no English but communicated perfectly through gestures and smiles. "This is what I want our whole life to feel like," Marcus said, as we sat on our hotel balcony overlooking the Mediterranean, sharing a bottle of local wine and planning our next day's adventures. Just us, discovering beautiful things together. I felt the same way. Our marriage was everything I'd dreamed of and more. Marcus was my best friend, my greatest supporter, and my most passionate lover. We complemented each other perfectly, balancing his meticulous planning with my spontaneous enthusiasm, his quiet introversion with my social energy. As our third anniversary approached, I started thinking about surprising Marcus with news that would change our lives forever. We'd been trying to get pregnant for 6 months, and I'd just gotten confirmation from my doctor that our efforts had been successful. I was planning to tell him during a romantic dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, complete with the sunflowers he'd brought me all those years ago. That Tuesday afternoon when Rebecca Martinez called, I'd been mentally rehearsing how I'd share the pregnancy news. I'd been folding tiny onesies I'd secretly purchased, imagining Marcus's face when he realized he was going to be a father. Our home felt full of possibility and future joy. Instead, a woman I'd never heard of, but whose supposed death had shaped my entire relationship, was about to reveal that everything I believed about my marriage was built on lies so elaborate and cruel that I couldn't initially comprehend their scope. Rebecca's voice remained steady as she continued speaking, but I could hear papers rustling in the background, as if she was consulting notes or documents while she destroyed my world. "Sarah, I know this is shocking, and I'm so sorry to be the one telling you this. But you need to know who you're really married to. Marcus and I were never widowed. We were divorced 2.5 years ago after I discovered he'd been living a double life for most of our marriage." My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, Luna sensing my distress and patting over to rest her head against my leg. "That's impossible. Marcus loved you. He still talks about you. He has your photo on his desk in our home office. Sarah, I need you to listen to me very carefully. The man you married is not who he says he is. His name isn't even Marcus Chen. It's Michael Rodriguez, and he's done this before. You're not his second wife. You're at least his fourth." The world seemed to tilt sideways as Rebecca's words sank in. Michael Rodriguez, fourth wife. Nothing about the man sleeping beside me every night was real. I stumbled to our home office, my bare feet silent on the cool hardwood, and stared at the framed photograph that had been there since the day Marcus moved in. The blonde woman smiling back at me from a beach somewhere tropical looked nothing like the voice I was hearing through my phone. "This photo," I whispered, touching the frame with shaking fingers. "This woman in the picture. Who is she?" Rebecca's sigh carried through the phone line like a weight settling on my chest. "That's Michelle Torres. She was his third wife, before you. As far as I know, she's still alive too, living somewhere in Phoenix with her new husband and twin daughters. Michael told her I was his sister who died in a skiing accident." I sank into Marcus's desk chair, surrounded by the carefully curated life he'd built in our home. His diplomas hung on the wall behind me, certificates from universities I'd never thought to verify, financial planning credentials that now seemed like elaborate forgeries, a small collection of books about grief and healing that had touched my heart when I'd first discovered them. All of it was theater. All of it was designed to support a character he'd created to win my trust and love. "How many of us are there?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I've been investigating since our divorce," Rebecca replied, and I could hear the exhaustion in her tone. "So far, I've confirmed 4 marriages. You, Michelle, myself, and before me, there was Anna Kim in Seattle. She thought I was his college girlfriend who died in a car accident. The pattern is always the same." My throat felt tight, like I was swallowing glass. "How did you find me?" "Property records. Michael gets careless about paperwork when he's been somewhere too long. Your marriage certificate was filed under Marcus Chen, but he used his real social security number. Once I had that, everything else connected." I pulled out my laptop with trembling hands, opening a new browser window. For the first time in 3 years of marriage, I began researching my own husband. Michael Rodriguez, Austin, Texas, financial consultant. The search results that populated made my stomach lurch. There he was, in a 2-year-old newspaper article about small business fraud. The photo was grainy, but it was unmistakably the man I'd made love to just that morning. Michael Rodriguez, 34, had been charged with embezzling client funds from his independent financial consulting practice. The charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence, but 3 clients had lost their retirement savings. Rebecca, I'm looking at a news article about fraud charges. That's how I found him initially. After our divorce, I hired a private investigator to track his whereabouts. Not for revenge, but for protection. I needed to know if he was still using my identity or trying to access accounts we'd shared. The investigator discovered the Austin charges about 6 months ago. I scrolled through more search results, my horror growing with each revelation. Michael Rodriguez had been arrested twice for identity theft. He'd been sued by former business partners in 3 different states. There were court documents showing restraining orders filed by women whose names I didn't recognize. How long? Were you married to him? I asked, clicking on a public records database that showed a marriage certificate between Rebecca Martinez and Michael Rodriguez dated 5 years ago. 3.5 years. We met in Denver when he was working as a mortgage broker under the name Marcus Rivera. He told me his previous girlfriend had died in a climbing accident, and he'd moved to Colorado to start fresh in the mountains she'd loved. The similarities were nauseating. Marcus had told me almost the identical story about moving to Austin, because Rebecca had always dreamed of visiting Texas. Even his methods of winning trust followed the same script. Rebecca, did he ever talk about having children with you? A pause. We tried for 2 years. I had 3 miscarriages during our marriage. Each time, Michael was incredibly supportive, holding me while I cried, researching fertility specialists, telling me we'd keep trying as long as I wanted. It wasn't until after I discovered his real identity that I realized the emotional support was just another manipulation tactic. My hand moved instinctively to my still flat stomach, where a tiny cluster of cells was growing into the child. Marcus and I had planned together. The child I'd been so excited to tell him about. The thought of sharing this news with a man who wasn't even who he claimed to be made me physically ill. Sarah, are you still there? I'm pregnant, I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I just found out yesterday. I was planning to surprise him tonight. The silence on Rebecca's end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with compassion and something that sounded like fear. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. This complicates everything. What do you mean? Sarah, you need to understand something about Michael. He doesn't just steal money or create fake identities for financial gain. He collects lives. He becomes obsessed with being the perfect husband, the ideal partner, until something threatens his control or he gets bored. Then he disappears, leaving behind destroyed credit, empty bank accounts, and women who have to rebuild their entire sense of reality. I was still absorbing this information when I heard Marcus's key in our front door. His familiar whistle echoed through the house as Luna bounded toward him, her tail wagging with excitement. The sounds of my normal life continuing while my world collapsed felt surreal. He's home, I whispered into the phone. Don't confront him alone, Rebecca said urgently. And whatever you do, don't let him know you've discovered the truth until you've had time to protect yourself financially and legally. Michael can be dangerous when he feels cornered. Sarah? I'm home, Marcus called from the entryway, his voice warm with the affection I'd treasured for 3 years. Something smells amazing. Are you cooking? I looked around our home office, seeing it clearly for the first time. The sparse personal items, the lack of childhood photos or mementos from college, the way every possession seemed carefully chosen to support his fictional identity rather than reflecting genuine history or sentiment. I have to go, I told Rebecca, closing my laptop as quietly as possible. Sarah, please be careful. I'm going to email you everything I've collected about Michael. Bank records, court documents, photos from his other marriages. You'll need evidence when you're ready to leave. How do you know I'll leave him? Rebecca's laugh was bitter but not unkind. Because you sound exactly like I did 3 years ago. Shocked, heartbroken, but not broken. You'll survive this, and you'll be stronger because of it. Just don't make the mistake of thinking love can fix him. I ended the call just as Marcus appeared in the doorway of his office, still wearing the navy suit he'd put on that morning when he'd kissed me goodbye and told me he loved me. His smile was radiant, genuine, exactly the expression that had made me fall in love with him in that coffee shop. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, crossing the room to wrap his arms around me. "You look upset. Rough day at work?" His embrace felt different now. Instead of comfort and safety, I felt trapped, studied, manipulated. But I forced myself to relax into his arms, buying time to process Rebecca's warnings and plan my next moves. "Just tired," I managed, breathing in the cologne that had become synonymous with home and security. "How was your day?" "Productive. I closed the Peterson account, and I have 2 new client meetings scheduled for next week." Marcus pulled back to study my face, his brown eyes searching for something I couldn't identify. "Are you sure you're okay? You seem different." The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but now I wondered if it was just another performance. How many times had he perfected this caring husband routine? How many women had fallen for the same gentle attention and emotional availability? "I'm fine," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, I have something exciting to tell you. Can we talk over dinner?" Marcus's face lit up with curiosity and delight. "Of course. Should I be nervous?" "It's good news," I replied, the lie tasting like metal in my mouth. Really good news. As Marcus headed to our bedroom to change clothes, I remained in his office, staring at the photograph of Michelle Torres and wondering how many other women had stood in similar rooms, surrounded by similar lies, believing they'd found their happily ever after with a man who didn't even exist. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Rebecca had already sent a compressed file containing dozens of documents. I quickly forwarded it to my personal email address and deleted the original, my heart pounding as I heard Marcus moving around upstairs. The next few hours would require the performance of my life. I needed to act normal, loving, unsuspecting, while I figured out how to protect myself and my unborn child from a man I was beginning to realize might be capable of anything. That evening, I prepared Marcus's favorite meal while he showered, my hands moving automatically through familiar motions while my mind raced through everything Rebecca had told me. Grilled salmon with lemon herbs, roasted asparagus, wild rice pilaf. The same dinner I'd made for our first anniversary, when Marcus had surprised me with a weekend trip to San Antonio. Even that memory felt tainted now. Had he taken Rebecca? To San Antonio too? Or Michelle? Did he have a repertoire of romantic gestures that he recycled through each relationship? Marcus emerged from our bedroom wearing jeans and the soft gray sweater I'd given him for his birthday, his hair still damp from the shower. He looked relaxed, happy, completely at ease in our home. There was no sign of guilt or deception in his demeanor, no indication that he was living a double life. "This looks incredible," he said, kissing my temple as he examined the plates I'd arranged. "What's the special occasion?" I'd planned to share my pregnancy news during this meal, to watch his face transform with joy and excitement as he realized we were going to be parents. Instead, I found myself studying his expressions for signs of the calculating manipulator Rebecca had described. "Just felt like celebrating us," I said, lighting the candles I'd placed on our dining room table. 3 years of marriage, successful careers, our beautiful home. Sometimes I feel like we need to acknowledge how lucky we are. Marcus's smile was tender as he pulled out my chair, a gesture he'd performed countless times during our relationship. I think about that every day. How lucky I am to have found you, to have a second chance at happiness after losing Rebecca. Hearing him speak her name while she was alive and well in Denver, while he'd built our entire love story on the foundation of her fictional death, made my stomach turn. I took a small sip of water, trying to settle my nausea. "Tell me about your day," I said. desperate to fill the silence with normal conversation while I processed the magnitude of his deception. "You mentioned the Peterson account." Marcus launched into a detailed description of his meeting with a small business owner who needed retirement planning services. His enthusiasm seemed genuine. His knowledge of financial planning appeared solid. Either he was an exceptionally talented actor, or some aspects of his professional persona contained elements of truth. "The fascinating thing about working with small business owners," he continued, cutting into his salmon, "is that they're so focused on building their companies that they often neglect their personal financial security. I love helping them see the bigger picture." I nodded and made appropriate responses, but internally I was wondering if Mr. Peterson even existed. Were Marcus's clients real people, or was his entire professional life as fictional as his personal history? "Sarah, you seem distracted tonight," Marcus observed, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Are you sure everything's okay?" The genuine concern in his voice was almost convincing. If I hadn't spoken to Rebecca, if I hadn't seen the court documents and news articles, I would have confided in him about my strange mood and let his comfort wash away my worries. Instead, I squeezed his hand and smiled, just thinking about how much our lives are going to change. Change how? This was the moment I'd imagined so differently. I'd pictured Marcus's face lighting up with wonder and joy as I told him about our baby. I'd imagined him lifting me off my feet and spinning me around our kitchen, both of us crying happy tears as we talked about names and nursery colors and all the ways this child would complete our family. "Marcus, I'm pregnant." His fork froze. Halfway to his mouth, his brown eyes widening with what looked like genuine shock. For several seconds, he didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me as if processing information that didn't compute. "Pregnant?" he finally said, setting down his fork with careful precision. "Are you sure?" "I took 3 tests yesterday, and I saw my doctor this morning, about 6 weeks along." Marcus stood abruptly, pushing back from the table so quickly that his chair scraped against our hardwood floor. He paced to our living room window, running his hands through his dark hair while staring out at our quiet street. "This is unexpected," he said, his voice strange and distant. I followed him to the living room, confused by his reaction. We'd been trying to get pregnant for months. We'd talked extensively about starting a family, about converting our spare bedroom into a nursery, about the kind of parents we wanted to be. "I thought you'd be happy," I said, touching his shoulder. "We've been planning this." Marcus turned to face me, and for just a moment I saw something in his expression that I'd never seen before. Something cold and calculating that made my blood run cold. Then his features softened, and he pulled me into his arms. "I am happy," he said, his voice warm again. "Just surprised. I didn't expect it to happen so quickly." But as he held me, I realized that Rebecca's warnings were already proving accurate. The man I'd fallen in love with would have swept me off my feet with joy at this news. This Marcus, this stranger wearing my husband's face, was calculating how an unplanned pregnancy would affect whatever game he was playing. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile 3 years of beautiful memories with the devastating truth about who I'd actually married. Every tender moment we'd shared now felt like evidence of my own gullibility. Every romantic gesture seemed like a manipulation tactic he'd perfected through practice with other women. The pregnancy symptoms I'd attributed to excitement and nerves over the past few weeks now felt like my body's way of preparing me for the fight of my life. I was carrying the child of a man who wasn't even who he claimed to be, and I had no idea what he was capable of when he realized his perfect life was about to unravel. As Marcus's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep, I carefully retrieved my laptop and began reading through the documents Rebecca had sent. Court records, police reports, bank statements showing systematic financial abuse, photographs of Michael with other women, other lives, other carefully constructed identities. By dawn, I had a clear picture of the man sleeping next to me. Michael Rodriguez was a master manipulator who had spent at least a decade perfecting the art of becoming whatever woman he targeted most needed him to be. He studied his marks carefully, identifying their vulnerabilities and desires, then crafted personas designed to fulfill their deepest longings. He'd seen my devotion to my family and created a tragic backstory that would inspire my nurturing instincts. He'd recognized my ambition and portrayed himself as a successful professional who would support my career goals. He'd detected my desire for emotional intimacy and become the most emotionally available man I'd ever encountered. Everything about our relationship had been designed to make me fall completely, irrevocably in love with a man who didn't exist. The question now was what Michael Rodriguez planned to do with the life he'd stolen from me, and how I could protect my unborn child from becoming part of his next elaborate deception. The following morning, I woke before Marcus and slipped quietly into our bathroom, my stomach churning from a combination of morning sickness and anxiety. Looking at my reflection in the mirror, I searched for signs that the woman staring back at me was strong enough to handle what lay ahead. Dark circles shadowed my brown eyes, and my olive complexion looked pale despite the Texas summer sun that usually kept me glowing. I splashed cold water on my face and tried to organize my thoughts. Rebecca's documents had painted a terrifying picture of systematic manipulation and financial destruction. Michael Rodriguez didn't just lie about his identity. He methodically destroyed the lives of women who trusted him, leaving them emotionally devastated and financially ruined. The pregnancy test I'd taken 3 days ago sat hidden in my makeup drawer, wrapped in tissue paper like a secret treasure. Yesterday, it had represented the beginning of our family's next chapter. Now it felt like evidence of how thoroughly I'd been deceived. Marcus was already awake when I returned to our bedroom, sitting on the edge of our bed with his phone in his hands. He looked up as I entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, but something in his tone felt different, less warm, more cautious. "How are you feeling? Any morning sickness yet?" I studied his face as I moved to our closet, selecting clothes for work. After 3 years of marriage, I knew Marcus's expressions intimately, but now I wondered how much of his emotional vocabulary had been performed rather than genuine. "A little queasy," I admitted, pulling on a navy blazer that would hide any changes in my body. "It's still early, though." Marcus nodded thoughtfully, then stood and moved to his own closet. "I've been thinking about the baby news. We should probably start looking into health insurance changes, prenatal care options, that sort of thing." His response sounded reasonable, practical, exactly what I would have expected from the responsible man I thought I'd married. But knowing what I now knew about his history, his words felt like chess moves rather than expressions of genuine excitement. "I have an appointment with my gynecologist next week," I said, watching his reflection in our closet mirror. "Dr. Patterson recommended a great obstetrician." "That's good. We want the best care for our baby." "Our baby." The possessive pronoun made my skin crawl. This wasn't our baby anymore. It was my child, and I needed to protect it from a father who might not even be who he claimed to be. Marcus continued getting dressed, chatting about his day's schedule and weekend plans as if nothing had changed. His ability to maintain normalcy while my entire world crumbled was both impressive and terrifying. How many other mornings had he performed this same routine while planning his exit strategy from previous marriages? Over breakfast, I watched Marcus interact with Luna, scratching behind her ears and sharing bits of his toast with her. Even our dog's affection for him felt suspicious now. Had he researched the best ways to bond with pets as part of his manipulation toolkit? "I should get to the office early today," Marcus said, finishing his coffee and checking his watch. "The Rodriguez account needs some attention." I nearly choked on my orange juice. "Rodriguez account?" Marcus paused, his hand halfway to his briefcase. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. Rodriguez Industries, he said smoothly. Local manufacturing company. They're expanding their employee retirement benefits. But I'd seen his hesitation, the way he'd searched for an explanation after reflexively using his real surname. How many other times had Michael Rodriguez slipped up, revealing pieces of his authentic identity that I'd been too trusting to notice? After Marcus left for work, I called in sick to my own job, something I'd done maybe 3 times in 5 years of employment. My supervisor, Grace, was understanding, telling me to rest and recover, but I could hear concern in her voice. I'd never been good at hiding stress, and the magnitude of what I was dealing with was beyond anything I'd experienced. I spent the morning creating multiple backup copies of Rebecca's documents, storing them in different email accounts and cloud storage services. If Marcus discovered what I knew, I wanted evidence preserved in places he couldn't access or delete. The medical records Rebecca had included were particularly devastating. During her marriage to Michael, she'd suffered 3 miscarriages and had undergone extensive fertility testing. The emotional trauma she'd described in her written statement made my heart ache, but it also revealed another layer of Michael's cruelty. Rebecca wrote that Michael had been exceptionally supportive during her pregnancy losses, researching fertility specialists, attending every appointment, holding her while she grieved. Only after discovering his true identity did she realize that his compassion had been calculated, designed to deepen her emotional dependence on him. The thought that my own pregnancy might become another tool in Michael's manipulation made me physically ill. I found myself unconsciously placing protective hands over my still flat stomach, whispering promises to the tiny life growing there that I would keep it safe no matter what that required. Around noon, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. My heart raced, wondering if Michael had somehow discovered my investigation and was calling from a burner phone. Instead, a woman's voice I didn't recognize spoke my name. Sarah Chen. This is Detective Maria Santos with the Austin Police Department. I understand you may have information related to an ongoing investigation involving Michael Rodriguez. My legs gave out and I sank onto our living room couch. How did you get my number? Rebecca Martinez contacted our fraud division yesterday. She's been working with law enforcement in multiple states to build a case against Mr. Rodriguez. She mentioned that you recently discovered his real identity. Detective Santos explained that Michael Rodriguez was wanted for questioning in connection with financial crimes in Colorado, Arizona, and Washington state. The pattern was always the same. He would marry women with stable careers and good credit, gradually gain access to their financial accounts, then disappear with their savings and retirement funds. The challenge we've faced, Detective Santos continued, is that Mr. Rodriguez is exceptionally careful about covering his tracks. He typically leaves his victims financially damaged, but not completely destroyed, which makes them reluctant to pursue criminal charges. Most women just want to rebuild their lives and forget about him. What makes this case different? Rebecca Martinez refused to let it go. She's spent 2 years documenting his activities, connecting with other victims, building a comprehensive case. But we need current information about his activities in Texas to make charges stick. Detective Santos wanted to meet with me to discuss what I'd observed about Marcus's business practices and financial activities. She assured me that I wasn't in legal trouble, but my cooperation could help prevent other women from falling victim to Michael's schemes. I agreed to meet her that afternoon at a coffee shop across town, far from Marcus's usual haunts. As I drove through Austin's familiar streets, I felt like I was seeing the city through different eyes. 3 years ago, Marcus had chosen Austin as his hunting ground, researching the local professional community and identifying potential targets. Had he followed me for weeks before orchestrating our accidental meeting at Brew and Bean? Had he studied my social media profiles, my work, history, My family background before deciding I would be his next victim? Detective Santos was a compact woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd chosen a corner table where we could speak privately, and she'd brought a thick file folder that made my stomach clench with anxiety. "First, I want you to know that you're not responsible for what happened to you," she said, sliding a legal pad across the table. "Michael Rodriguez is a professional con artist who has perfected his techniques over many years. Even experienced investigators have been fooled by men like him." She showed me photographs from his other marriages, pointing out the similarities in his approach. In each relationship, he'd assumed a slightly different identity, but maintained the same core story elements: tragic loss of a previous partner, relocation for a fresh start, career in financial services. "The woman in this photo is Anna Kim from Seattle," Detective Santos said, pointing to a wedding picture that looked disturbingly similar to my own. She was a software engineer who thought she'd married Marcus Chen, a financial advisor whose wife had died in a skiing accident. When Michael disappeared, Anna lost her savings, her house, and her ability to trust her own judgment. The photograph showed a radiant bride who looked exactly like I had on my wedding day, full of joy and love and trust. Seeing the happiness in Anna's face, knowing how that happiness had been destroyed, made me want to hunt down Michael Rodriguez and make him pay for every heart he'd broken. "How many women are there?" "We've confirmed 6 marriages over the past 12 years. There may be more that we haven't discovered yet." Rebecca Martinez was the first victim who fought back, who refused to disappear quietly while he moved on to his next target. Detective Santos explained that Michael's pattern was escalating. His early victims had lost modest amounts of money, but his recent schemes had become more sophisticated and financially devastating. Michelle Torres in Phoenix had lost over $200,000 in retirement savings. Anna Kim's financial losses had forced her into bankruptcy. "What's different about your situation," Detective Santos continued, "is that you discovered the truth while you're still married to him. That gives us an opportunity to gather real-time evidence of his current activities." She wanted me to document Marcus's daily routines, photograph any financial documents I could access, and record conversations if possible. The thought of turning my home into a surveillance operation terrified me, but I understood that other women's safety might depend on stopping Michael before he could disappear and reinvent himself somewhere else. "What about my pregnancy?" I asked, the question I'd been dreading. "What happens to my baby if Michael is arrested?" Detective Santos leaned forward, her expression compassionate but serious. "Sarah, that's something you'll need to discuss with a family law attorney. But I can tell you that children are generally better off without fathers who are professional criminals." That evening, I sat in my car outside our house for 20 minutes, preparing to go inside and pretend everything was normal while gathering evidence against my own husband. The craftsman-style home that had represented safety and love now felt like a stage set where I'd been unknowingly performing the role of devoted wife. Marcus was in the kitchen when I entered, stirring something that smelled like curry and filled our home with warm, familiar scents. He looked up with a smile that had once made my heart skip, and I forced myself to smile back. "There's my beautiful wife," he said, kissing my cheek. "How are you feeling? Still queasy?" "A little better," I replied, noting how naturally the lies came now. "What smells so good?" "Thai red curry with chicken. I thought something spicy might help with your appetite." Marcus had always been an excellent cook, and I'd attributed his culinary skills to the cooking classes he claimed to have taken with Rebecca. Now I wondered if he'd learned to cook as part of his repertoire of husband skills, designed to make his targets feel cherished and cared for. Over dinner, Marcus talked about his day, describing client meetings and investment strategies, with the same enthusiasm he'd always shown for his work. Either he was an exceptional actor, or some part of his professional persona was genuine. "The Peterson account is moving forward," he said, twirling noodles around his fork. He's decided to invest in a diversified portfolio for his retirement planning. I made appropriate responses while studying his face for tells, signs that he was lying or performing. But Marcus had perfected his craft over many years, and I couldn't detect any obvious deception in his manner. After dinner, I volunteered to clean up while Marcus worked in his office. This gave me an opportunity to explore areas of our home I'd previously respected as his private space. Using my phone, I photographed documents from his desk, client, folders, business cards, anything that might help Detective Santos verify whether his current professional activities were legitimate. What I discovered was a masterclass in creating false credibility. Marcus had business cards from 3 different financial services companies, each with slightly different contact information. His desk drawer contained letterhead from investment, firms that didn't exist, and client agreements for people I suspected were fictional. The most chilling discovery was a notebook filled with detailed observations about my daily routines, my friends' names and personal information, my family dynamics, and financial habits. Michael Rodriguez had been studying me long before we'd ever met, mapping out every aspect of my life that could be useful for his purposes. I found similar notebooks with information about other women, including physical descriptions, career, details, and what appeared to be psychological profiles noting their vulnerabilities and desires. Rebecca Martinez, Michelle Torres, Anna Kim. Each woman reduced to data points in Michael's criminal enterprise. The notebook about me contained entries dating back 4 years, months before our coffee shop meeting. He'd researched my college, graduation, my job at TechFlow Solutions, my favorite restaurants and weekend activities. Our romantic courtship had been a carefully orchestrated campaign based on intelligence he'd gathered while stalking me. When Marcus finished his work and joined me in our living room, I was curled up on our couch with a book, trying to appear relaxed while my mind raced with the implications of what I'd discovered. He settled beside me, pulling my feet into his lap and massaging them with the gentle attention that had always made me feel cherished. "You're tense," he observed, his fingers working at knots in my muscles. "Still processing the baby news?" "It's a big change," I said carefully. "I keep thinking about everything that's going to be different." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Change can be overwhelming, even when it's good change. But we'll figure it out together, just like we always have." His words sounded supportive and loving, exactly what I would have wanted to hear from my husband. But knowing about the notebook, upstairs, knowing that he'd been manipulating me since before we'd even met, made his comfort feel like another calculated performance. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake planning my escape strategy. Detective Santos had emphasized the importance of maintaining normalcy while gathering evidence, but every day I stayed in this house felt like another day of danger for my unborn child. I needed to establish financial independence, secure legal representation, and create a safe place to go when the time came to leave. Most importantly, I needed to do all of this without alerting Michael that his perfect life was about to collapse. The man sleeping next to me had destroyed multiple women's lives with his elaborate deceptions. He'd stolen their money, their trust, their ability to believe in love. But I wasn't going to be another victim who disappeared quietly while he moved on to his next target. Michael Rodriguez had chosen the wrong woman this time. I was going to make sure his criminal career ended with me, and that no other woman would fall victim to his lies. The pregnancy that had once represented our shared future now felt like my motivation to fight harder than I'd ever fought for anything. My child deserved better than a father who wasn't even who he claimed to be, and I was going to make sure we both survived this nightmare. As dawn approached, I made silent promises to the tiny life growing inside me. I would protect us both from the man who had stolen our lives, and I would rebuild something real and honest from the ashes of this elaborate deception. The war for my freedom was just beginning, but I was no longer fighting alone. Rebecca Martinez, had shown me it was possible to survive Michael Rodriguez and help other women escape his web of lies. Detective Santos had assured me that law enforcement was finally ready to hold him accountable for his crimes. Most importantly, I'd discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, a fierce protective instinct that would carry me through whatever battles lay ahead. Michael Rodriguez might have fooled me into marriage, but he wasn't going to succeed in destroying me the way he'd destroyed so many others. The woman he'd married might have been naive enough to fall for his lies, but the woman planning his downfall was someone entirely different, someone dangerous in her own right, someone who would stop at nothing to protect her child and seek justice for every victim whose life he'd shattered. My transformation from trusting wife to determined adversary had begun, and Michael Rodriguez had no idea what was coming for him. The moment of truth arrived on a humid Thursday evening in late August, 3 weeks after Rebecca's phone call had shattered my world. I'd spent those weeks meticulously documenting Michael's activities, photographing documents, recording conversations, and building an airtight case with Detective Santos. Every smile I'd forced, every loving gesture I'd performed, every night I'd lain beside him pretending to sleep while my heart pounded with terror had led to this moment. Michael was in our home office, completely absorbed in whatever scheme he was orchestrating on his computer. I could hear his fingers clicking across the keyboard, the sound that had once represented his dedicated work ethic now seeming sinister and calculating. Luna lay at his feet, her loyalty to the man who'd fed her treats and scratched her ears unchanged despite everything I'd learned about his true nature. I stood in our kitchen, my hands trembling as I prepared the trap that would end our marriage and hopefully Michael's criminal career. Detective Santos had explained that we needed him to incriminate himself on recording, to admit details about his other identities or his financial schemes. The digital recorder hidden in my purse felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My pregnancy was beginning to show, just a slight curve that could still be hidden under loose clothing. 14 weeks along now, past the dangerous first trimester, carrying the child of a man whose real name I still sometimes forgot. The baby had become my source of strength during the darkest moments of the past month, reminding me that I was fighting for something bigger than just my own survival. The legal papers I'd received that morning sat folded in my back pocket, divorce documents that my attorney had prepared based on evidence of fraud and bigamy. In Texas, discovering that your spouse had lied about previous marriages was grounds for annulment, meaning my marriage to Michael Rodriguez had never been legally valid. The realization that I'd never actually been his wife should have felt liberating, but instead it made me feel like I'd been living in a complete fantasy. Rebecca had flown in from Denver that morning, staying at a hotel downtown while we coordinated the final phase of our plan. She'd become more than just my predecessor. She'd become my strongest ally and closest friend. Her courage in refusing to disappear quietly after Michael destroyed her life had created the opportunity for justice that might never have existed otherwise. Michelle Torres was driving in from Phoenix, and Anna Kim had flown down from Seattle. All of Michael's known victims would be present when the police arrested him. A united front of women who'd refused to let him continue destroying lives with impunity. Detective Santos had arranged for additional officers to be stationed around our neighborhood, ensuring that Michael couldn't escape when he realized his carefully constructed world was collapsing. I walked slowly toward our home office, each step feeling monumental. Through the doorway, I could see Michael's profile, illuminated by his computer screen, his handsome features focused and intense. Even now, knowing everything I knew about his lies and manipulations, part of me ached for the man I'd thought he was. The grief for that fictional person felt as real as mourning an actual death. "Michael," I said softly, using his real name, for the first time in our relationship. He didn't react immediately, continuing to type for several seconds before turning to face me. When his eyes met mine, I saw the exact moment he realized that something fundamental had shifted. His expression changed from casual attention to sharp alertness, like a predator suddenly aware of danger. "What did you call me?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. Michael Rodriguez, I repeated, stepping into the office and closing the door behind me. That is your real name, isn't it? Not Marcus Chen, not Marcus Rivera, not whatever other identity you created to seduce your next victim. Michael's face went completely blank, all emotion draining away until he looked like a stranger wearing a familiar mask. He slowly closed his laptop and turned his chair to face me fully, his movements deliberate and calculated. I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah. You're being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones can cause— Stop, I interrupted, pulling out my phone and showing him a photograph of one of his surveillance notebooks. I found all of them, Michael. Every notebook where you documented my routines, my friends, my family. I know you were stalking me for months before we met. I know about Rebecca, Michelle, Anna, and probably others you haven't even told the police about yet. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. The loving husband I'd lived with for 3 years vanished completely, replaced by someone cold and calculating who studied me like I was a problem to be solved. His brown eyes, which had always seemed warm and trustworthy, now looked flat and predatory. How long have you known? He asked, his voice completely different now. Gone was the gentle tone and caring inflection I'd fallen in love with. This voice was sharp, analytical, completely devoid of emotion. 3 weeks, since Rebecca called and told me she wasn't dead. Change can be overwhelming, even when it's good change. But we'll figure it out together, just like we always have. His words sounded supportive and loving, exactly what I would have wanted to hear from my husband. But knowing about the notebook, upstairs, knowing that he'd been manipulating me since before we'd even met, made his comfort feel like another calculated performance. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake planning my escape strategy. Detective Santos had emphasized the importance of maintaining normalcy while gathering evidence, but every day I stayed in this house felt like another day of danger for my unborn child. I needed to establish financial independence, secure legal representation, and create a safe place to go when the time came to leave. Most importantly, I needed to do all of this without alerting Michael that his perfect life was about to collapse. The man sleeping next to me had destroyed multiple women's lives with his elaborate deceptions. He'd stolen their money, their trust, their ability to believe in love. But I wasn't going to be another victim who disappeared quietly while he moved on to his next target. Michael Rodriguez had chosen the wrong woman this time. I was going to make sure his criminal career ended with me, and that no other woman would fall victim to his lies. The pregnancy that had once represented our shared future now felt like my motivation to fight harder than I'd ever fought for anything. My child deserved better than a father who wasn't even who he claimed to be, and I was going to make sure we both survived this nightmare. As dawn approached, I made silent promises to the tiny life growing inside me. I would protect us both from the man who had stolen our lives, and I would rebuild something real and honest from the ashes of this elaborate deception. The war for my freedom was just beginning, but I was no longer fighting alone. Rebecca Martinez had shown me it was possible to survive Michael Rodriguez and help other women escape his web of lies. Detective Santos had assured me that law enforcement was finally ready to hold him accountable for his crimes. Most importantly, I'd discovered a strength I didn't know I possessed, a fierce protective instinct that would carry me through whatever battles lay ahead. Michael Rodriguez might have fooled me into marriage, but he wasn't going to succeed in destroying me the way he'd destroyed so many others. The woman he'd married might have been naive enough to fall for his lies, but the woman planning his downfall was someone entirely different, someone dangerous in her own right, someone who would stop at nothing to protect her child and seek justice for every victim whose life he'd shattered. My transformation from trusting wife to determined adversary had begun, and Michael Rodriguez had no idea what was coming for him. The moment of truth arrived on a humid Thursday evening in late August, 3 weeks after Rebecca's phone call had shattered my world. I'd spent those weeks meticulously documenting Michael's activities, photographing documents, recording conversations, and building an airtight case with Detective Santos. Every smile I'd forced, every loving gesture I'd performed, every night I'd lain beside him pretending to sleep while my heart pounded with terror had led to this moment. Michael was in our home office, completely absorbed in whatever scheme he was orchestrating on his computer. I could hear his fingers clicking across the keyboard, the sound that had once represented his dedicated work ethic now seeming sinister and calculating. Luna lay at his feet, her loyalty to the man who'd fed her treats and scratched her ears unchanged despite everything I'd learned about his true nature. I stood in our kitchen, my hands trembling as I prepared the trap that would end our marriage and hopefully Michael's criminal career. Detective Santos had explained that we needed him to incriminate himself on recording, to admit details about his other identities or his financial schemes. The digital recorder hidden in my purse felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My pregnancy was beginning to show, just a slight curve that could still be hidden under loose clothing. 14 weeks along now, past the dangerous first trimester, carrying the child of a man whose real name I still sometimes forgot. The baby had become my source of strength during the darkest moments of the past month, reminding me that I was fighting for something bigger than just my own survival. The legal papers I'd received that morning sat folded in my back pocket, divorce documents that my attorney had prepared based on evidence of fraud and bigamy. In Texas, discovering that your spouse had lied about previous marriages was grounds for annulment, meaning my marriage to Michael Rodriguez had never been legally valid. The realization that I'd never actually been his wife should have felt liberating, but instead it made me feel like I'd been living in a complete fantasy. Rebecca had flown in from Denver that morning, staying at a hotel downtown while we coordinated the final phase of our plan. She'd become more than just my predecessor. She'd become my strongest ally and closest friend. Her courage in refusing to disappear quietly after Michael destroyed her life had created the opportunity for justice that might never have existed otherwise. Michelle Torres was driving in from Phoenix, and Anna Kim had flown down from Seattle. All of Michael's known victims would be present when the police arrested him. A united front of women who'd refused to let him continue destroying lives with impunity. Detective Santos had arranged for additional officers to be stationed around our neighborhood, ensuring that Michael couldn't escape when he realized his carefully constructed world was collapsing. I walked slowly toward our home office, each step feeling monumental. Through the doorway, I could see Michael's profile, illuminated by his computer screen, his handsome features focused and intense. Even now, knowing everything I knew about his lies and manipulations, part of me ached for the man I'd thought he was. The grief for that fictional person felt as real as mourning an actual death. "Michael," I said softly, using his real name, for the first time in our relationship. He didn't react immediately, continuing to type for several seconds before turning to face me. When his eyes met mine, I saw the exact moment he realized that something fundamental had shifted. His expression changed from casual attention to sharp alertness, like a predator suddenly aware of danger. "What did you call me?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Michael Rodriguez," I repeated, stepping into the office and closing the door behind me. "That is your real name, isn't it? Not Marcus Chen, not Marcus Rivera, not whatever other identity you created to seduce your next victim." Michael's face went completely blank, all emotion draining away until he looked like a stranger wearing a familiar mask. He slowly closed his laptop and turned his chair to face me fully, his movements deliberate and calculated. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah. You're being paranoid. Pregnancy hormones can cause—" "Stop," I interrupted, pulling out my phone and showing him a photograph of one of his surveillance notebooks. "I found all of them, Michael. Every notebook where you documented my routines, my friends, my family. I know you were stalking me for months before we met. I know about Rebecca, Michelle, Anna, and probably others you haven't even told the police about yet." The transformation was immediate and terrifying. The loving husband I'd lived with for 3 years vanished completely, replaced by someone cold and calculating who studied me like I was a problem to be solved. His brown eyes, which had always seemed warm and trustworthy, now looked flat and predatory. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice completely different now. Gone was the gentle tone and caring inflection I'd fallen in love with. This voice was sharp, analytical, completely devoid of emotion. 3 weeks, since Rebecca called and told me she wasn't dead. The sound of car doors slamming in our driveway made both of us freeze. Through the office window, I could see police vehicles surrounding our house, their red and blue lights casting eerie shadows across our front yard. "Sarah, whatever you've done, we can fix this," Michael said, his voice shifting back toward the manipulative tone I knew so well. "Think about our baby. Think about our life together. I love you." "No, you don't," I replied, amazed by how calm I felt now that the moment had finally arrived. "You don't even know how to love someone. You only know how to study them and become whatever you think they want." The front door opened with the sound of Detective Santos's voice announcing herself. Michael looked around the office desperately, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Our house was surrounded, and there was nowhere for him to run. "Michael Rodriguez, this is the Austin Police Department," Detective Santos called from our living room. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Michael's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the calculating criminal underneath all his carefully crafted personas. "You have no idea what you've done," he hissed at me. "You think you're so smart, but you're just another naive woman who fell for a fantasy." "Maybe," I acknowledged, "but I'm the naive woman who's about to put you in prison." Detective Santos appeared in the office doorway with 2 uniformed officers, all of them wearing tactical vests and serious expressions. "Michael Rodriguez, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and bigamy. You have the right to remain silent." As they read him his rights and placed handcuffs around his wrists, Michael stared at me with pure hatred. Gone was any pretense of the loving husband he'd pretended to be. The man being led away in custody was a stranger who'd stolen 3 years of my life and nearly destroyed my ability to trust my own judgment. "Sarah," he called as the officers guided him toward our front door. "That baby you're carrying belongs to me too. This isn't over." The threat in his voice made my blood run cold, but Detective Santos placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "He can't hurt you anymore," she said quietly. "We've got enough evidence to put him away for a very long time." Rebecca, Michelle, and Anna were waiting in our living room when I emerged from the office. 3 women who'd survived Michael Rodriguez's elaborate deceptions and found the courage to fight back. Seeing them together in the home where I'd lived out his latest fantasy felt surreal and empowering at the same time. "How are you holding up?" Rebecca asked, pulling me into a hug that felt like coming home to family I'd never known I needed. "I'm okay," I said, and for the first time in weeks, that was actually true. "We did it. We actually stopped him." The next few hours passed in a blur of police interviews, evidence collection, and legal procedures. Detective Santos explained that Michael would be held without bail, given his history of fleeing when faced with criminal charges. The evidence we'd gathered would support charges in multiple states, and the coordinated prosecutions would ensure he couldn't escape justice by pleading out in one jurisdiction. My attorney arrived to discuss the annulment proceedings and help me understand my rights regarding the pregnancy. Since my marriage to Michael had never been legally valid due to his existing marriages, I had sole custody of our unborn child, unless he could prove paternity and petition for visitation rights from prison. Given his criminal history and the circumstances of your relationship, my lawyer explained, it's highly unlikely any court would grant him parental rights, but we'll take every precaution to protect you and the baby. As the police finished collecting evidence from our home, I stood in the living room where Michael and I had spent countless evenings watching movies and planning our future. The furniture we'd chosen together, the photos from our travels, the small domestic details that had made this house feel like home all seemed like props from a stage production now. Rebecca found me there, staring at our wedding photo on the mantelpiece. "It's hard to reconcile, isn't it?" she said softly. Knowing that something that felt so real was completely fabricated. "I keep wondering how I could have been so blind," I admitted. "There must have been signs I missed, red flags I ignored." Michael is a professional, Sarah. He's spent years perfecting his techniques for making women fall in love with fictional characters. You're not stupid or naive. You're the victim of a very sophisticated criminal who studies human psychology to exploit people's deepest desires. Michelle and Anna joined us in the living room, 3 other women who understood exactly what I was experiencing. We spent the evening sharing stories about our relationships with Michael, comparing notes about his methods and marveling at the consistency of his approach. He told each of us about losing a previous love in a tragic accident, Anna observed. The details changed, but the emotional manipulation was identical. He knew that trauma would make us want to take care of him. And he was always just emotionally available enough to seem perfect, but distant enough about his past to prevent us from digging too deeply, Michelle added. Every relationship felt intense and romantic, but looking back, he never revealed anything genuinely personal about himself. We talked until dawn, processing our shared trauma and celebrating our collective victory over a man who'd tried to destroy all of us. By the time the sun rose over Austin, I felt connected to a sisterhood I'd never imagined I'd need, but was grateful to have found. Over the following months, Michael Rodriguez was prosecuted in 4 different states. The evidence we'd gathered, combined with testimony from his various victims, resulted in convictions for fraud, identity theft, bigamy, and elder abuse related to crimes we hadn't even known about. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole. I moved to San Antonio for a fresh start, accepting a promotion with my company that allowed me to transfer to their satellite office. The distance from Austin helped me separate my new life from the memories of my time with Michael, and the larger city provided anonymity I'd lost during the media coverage of his arrest. My daughter Emma was born in February, a healthy baby, girl who inherited my dark hair and stubborn chin. I chose her name carefully, wanting something that represented new beginnings and strength. Emma means whole or complete, which felt perfect for a child who'd already taught me that I was capable of more courage than I'd ever imagined. Rebecca became Emma's honorary aunt, visiting regularly and helping me navigate single motherhood, with the wisdom of someone who understood my unique circumstances. Michelle and Anna stayed in touch through social media, sharing updates about their own healing journeys and new relationships built on honesty rather than deception. The financial recovery took longer than the emotional healing. Michael had drained our joint savings account and run up significant debt on credit cards I'd foolishly allowed him to access. But the legal settlement from his conviction helped cover the losses, and my career continued to flourish as I channeled my analytical skills into rebuilding my financial security. 2 years after Michael's arrest, I met David Martinez at a coffee shop in San Antonio, an irony that made Rebecca laugh when I called to tell her about it. David was a pediatric nurse who'd recently moved to Texas from California, and our initial conversations were refreshingly honest and straightforward. I told him about Michael on our 3rd date, explaining the whole story and giving him every opportunity to run from the complications my past might bring to any relationship. Instead, David thanked me for my honesty and shared his own story about recovering from a marriage that had ended when he discovered his ex-wife's drug addiction. "We all have histories that shape us," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "What matters is how we've grown from our experiences and what we're willing to build together." Our relationship developed slowly, built on transparency and mutual respect rather than overwhelming passion. David met Emma when she was 8 months old, and his genuine delight in her personality convinced me that some men were capable of authentic love without hidden agendas. When Emma took her first steps at 14 months, she toddled straight into David's arms, and I knew I'd found someone worthy of the family we were building together. David proposed a year later, presenting me with a simple platinum band and a promise that our marriage would be founded on truth rather than fantasy. I said yes, not because David represented a rescue from my past, but because I'd learned to trust my own judgment again. The woman who'd fallen for Michael Rodriguez's lies had been replaced by someone stronger, more discerning, and infinitely more grateful for authentic connection. Our wedding was small and intimate, attended by Rebecca, Michelle, Anna, and the close friends who'd supported me through the darkest period of my life. Emma served as our flower girl, scattering rose petals while David and I exchanged vows that acknowledged our complicated pasts while celebrating our honest future. Michael Rodriguez never attempted to contact me after his conviction, probably recognizing that any communication would violate his restraining order and extend his prison sentence. Emma grew up knowing only David as her father figure, and when she was old enough to understand, I would tell her the truth about her biological father in age-appropriate ways. For now, though, she was simply a bright, curious toddler who brought joy to everyone she met. Her laughter filled our house with a lightness that erased the shadows from my memories of the home I'd shared with a stranger. 5 years after Rebecca's phone call had shattered my world, I stood in my kitchen in San Antonio, preparing breakfast for my husband and daughter, while thinking about how dramatically my life had changed. The woman who'd answered that call had been naive enough to trust completely without question. The woman making pancakes for her family had learned to balance openness with wisdom, love with self-protection. Emma babbled happily in her high chair while David read her favorite picture book, their heads bent together over colorful illustrations. Watching them, I felt grateful for the circuitous path that had led me to this moment. Without Michael's betrayal, I might never have discovered the strength I was capable of, or learned to recognize the difference between performed affection and genuine love. The doorbell rang, interrupting my peaceful morning reflection. David went to answer it, returning with a package addressed to me from an unknown sender. Inside was a book about surviving narcissistic abuse, along with a handwritten note. "Dear Sarah," the letter began, "my name is Jessica Walsh, and I just divorced my husband after discovering he'd been living under a false identity for our entire marriage. A mutual friend gave me your contact information and suggested I reach out. I hope we can talk soon. I think I need to hear from someone who survived what I'm going through." I looked at David, who'd read the note over my shoulder and was all ready, nodding his understanding. Our peaceful Saturday morning would include a phone call with another woman who was discovering that her life had been built on lies, another survivor who needed guidance from someone who'd walked this path before her. The work of healing from Michael Rodriguez's deception would apparently never be completely finished. But instead of feeling burdened by Jessica's request for help, I felt honored to be part of a network of women who refused to let their experiences with predators define their futures. Emma reached for me from her high chair, sticky fingers grabbing for my face with toddler determination. As I lifted her up and felt her small arms wrap around my neck, I realized that Michael Rodriguez had given me something valuable after all. The knowledge that I was capable of protecting what mattered most, no matter how elaborate the threats against it might be. The man who'd tried to destroy my ability to trust had inadvertently taught me to trust myself above all else. And that lesson, painful as it had been to learn, was worth more than any fantasy he could have offered. The phone call that changed. Everything came on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Michael's conviction. I was feeding 18-month-old Emma her breakfast in our sunny San Antonio kitchen when my cell phone buzzed with an unknown number. After my experience with Rebecca's initial call, I'd become cautious about answering unfamiliar numbers, but something compelled me to pick up. Sarah Chen? The voice was female, young, and trembling with barely controlled emotion. Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Amanda Foster. I'm calling from Dallas. I think I was married to your ex-husband, and I need your help. The spoon of applesauce I'd been feeding Emma clattered to the floor as my hands began shaking. Michael Rodriguez was supposed to be safely locked away in federal prison, serving his 15-year sentence for fraud and identity theft. How could there be another victim calling me now? I'm sorry. What do you mean you think you were married to my ex-husband? I managed to ask, my voice barely steady. Amanda's story spilled out in a rush of words punctuated by tears. She'd been married to a man named Matthew Chen for 8 months, a financial advisor who'd swept her off her feet with stories of losing his first wife in a tragic boating accident. She was a pediatric nurse at Children's Medical Center recently, divorced and vulnerable when Matthew had appeared in her life like an answer to her prayers for a second chance at love. He was perfect, Amanda sobbed into the phone. Too perfect, just like you probably thought your husband was. But yesterday, I was cleaning out his desk to surprise him with a new organization system, and I found a folder with newspaper clippings about Michael Rodriguez's arrest. There were photos of you, Rebecca, Michelle, and Anna. And there was a handwritten note that said, "Study their testimonies. Learn from mistakes." My blood turned to ice. Amanda, where is your husband now? That's just it. He disappeared 3 days ago. Said he had a business conference in Houston, but when I called the hotel where he was supposed to be staying, they had no record of any Matthew Chen. His phone goes straight to voicemail, and his office says he took indefinite personal leave. I closed my eyes, trying to process what Amanda was telling me. If Michael Rodriguez was still in prison, then someone else was using his methods, his techniques, possibly even his research on his previous victims. The thought that Michael's criminal enterprise might have been larger than we'd realized, that he might have taught others to replicate his schemes, made me feel sick. Amanda, I need you to call Detective Maria Santos with the Austin Police Department immediately, I said, grabbing a pen to write down her contact information. And don't go home alone. Is there somewhere safe you can stay while we figure out what's happening? I'm at my sister's house in Plano. I was too scared to go home after I found those files. Over the next several hours, Amanda's situation unraveled into something more complex and terrifying than any of us had anticipated. Detective Santos confirmed that Michael Rodriguez was still incarcerated, but her investigation into Amanda's husband, Matthew Chen, revealed a criminal network that extended far beyond one man's individual crimes. Matthew Chen was actually David Liu, Michael Rodriguez's former cellmate who had been released 6 months earlier after serving time for embezzlement. While in prison, Michael had apparently shared his techniques for identifying and manipulating vulnerable women, providing David with a detailed playbook for creating false identities and elaborate romantic deceptions. It's like a criminal mentorship program, Detective Santos explained during an emergency conference call that included myself, Rebecca, Michelle, Anna, and Amanda. Rodriguez has been corresponding with multiple former inmates, teaching them his methods in exchange for a percentage of their profits. The revelation that Michael's influence was continuing to destroy lives even from behind bars was devastating. We'd thought his conviction would end his ability to hurt people, but instead he'd found a way to multiply his criminal impact through surrogates, who carried out his schemes while he remained safely in prison. Amanda's situation was particularly dangerous because David Liu had access to all of Michael's research on his previous victims. He knew our names, our backgrounds, our psychological profiles, and potentially our current addresses. The files Amanda had discovered suggested that David was using us as case studies to perfect his own manipulation techniques. We need to warn the other women, Rebecca said during our call. If David has been studying Michael's methods, he might try to target us or our families. The thought of this nightmare extending to Emma, to David Martinez, who had become the loving father she deserved, to the peaceful life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of Michael's deception, filled me with a protective rage I'd never experienced before. I'd survived one predator's attempts to destroy my life, and I wasn't about to let his protégés threaten my family. Detective Santos coordinated with law enforcement agencies across multiple states to track David Liu's activities. What they discovered was a sophisticated operation involving at least 6 different men who had learned Michael's techniques and were actively targeting women in cities throughout the Southwest. Each man had adopted slightly different approaches based on Michael's teachings, but the core methodology remained the same: extensive research on potential victims, carefully crafted tragic backstories designed to inspire sympathy, gradual financial manipulation disguised as shared planning for the future, and systematic isolation from support systems that might detect the deception. The scope of the criminal network was staggering. In the 6 months since David Liu's release from prison, he and his associates had defrauded over 20 women out of an estimated $2 million. Some victims had lost their life savings, others had been left with massive debt, and several had suffered complete emotional breakdowns that required professional mental health intervention. "This isn't just about money anymore," Michelle observed during one of our strategy sessions. "These men are systematically destroying women's ability to trust their own judgment, to believe in love, to feel safe in relationships. The psychological damage they're causing is intentional and calculated." We decided to fight back with the same level of organization and coordination that the criminals were using against innocent women. Rebecca spearheaded the creation of a support network that connected victims across multiple states, sharing information about the various perpetrators and their methods while providing emotional support for women whose lives had been shattered by elaborate deceptions. I used my marketing expertise to create a comprehensive awareness campaign, developing social media strategies and educational materials that would help women recognize the warning signs of romance fraud before they became victims. The campaign went viral within weeks, reaching millions of people and generating hundreds of tips that helped law enforcement track down additional members of the criminal network. Anna's background in software engineering proved invaluable for creating secure communication systems that allowed victims to share information without risking further exposure to their predators. Her encrypted platforms enabled women to connect safely while building cases against the men who had targeted them. Michelle's experience in healthcare administration helped establish partnerships with victim services organizations, ensuring that women who had been financially devastated by these crimes could access the counseling and legal support they needed to rebuild their lives. Amanda became our most effective advocate for legislative change, using her nursing background and personal experience to testify before state congressional committees about the need for stronger laws against romance fraud and identity theft. Her testimony was instrumental in passing new legislation that increased penalties for criminals who targeted vulnerable individuals through romantic deception. The investigation into David Liu's network took 8 months to complete, but the results exceeded our most optimistic expectations. 15 men were arrested across 7 states, charged with crimes ranging from fraud and identity theft to stalking and elder abuse. The total amount of money recovered and returned to victims exceeded $4 million. During the trials, it was revealed that Michael Rodriguez had been operating what prosecutors described as a criminal university from his prison cell, not only teaching his techniques to other inmates, but also receiving detailed reports about their activities and taking a percentage of their profits through complex money laundering schemes. Additional charges were filed against Michael for conspiracy and racketeering, extending his sentence by another 20 years and ensuring that he would never again have the opportunity to directly harm another woman. The correspondence between Michael and his protégés, which had been monitored and recorded by prison authorities, provided evidence of his continuing criminal enterprises and his complete lack of remorse for the lives he'd destroyed. The trial also revealed the true extent of Michael's original crimes. Investigators discovered evidence of at least 12 additional victims spanning back 15 years, women whose lives had been destroyed so thoroughly that they'd never reported the crimes or had been too ashamed to come forward with their stories. During the sentencing phase, I was asked to provide victim impact testimony about how Michael's crimes had affected my life and my family. Standing in that courtroom, looking at the man who had stolen 3 years of my life and nearly destroyed my ability to trust my own judgment, I felt a complex mixture of anger, sadness, and ultimately, strength. Michael Rodriguez didn't just steal money from me, I told the judge and jury. He stole my sense of reality, my ability to trust my own perceptions, my faith in love itself. But in trying to destroy me, he inadvertently taught me something invaluable, that I am stronger than I ever imagined, that I can survive betrayal and manipulation and still build something beautiful from the ashes. I described how his crimes had led me to connect with other survivors, how we'd turned our shared trauma into a force for protecting other women, how his attempts to make us victims had instead created a sisterhood of warriors determined to prevent others from suffering the same fate. The man sitting in this courtroom today believes he's a criminal mastermind, I continued, looking directly at Michael for the first time since his arrest. But he's actually just a small, pathetic person who preys on the capacity for love that makes us human. His victims are stronger than he is, braver than he is, and more capable of genuine connection than he will ever be. Michael stared back at me with the same flat, emotionless expression I remembered from the night of his arrest. But this time, his gaze held no power over me. I saw him clearly for what he was, a damaged individual whose inability to form authentic relationships had led him to systematically destroy the authentic relationships of others. The judge sentenced Michael to an additional 30 years in federal prison, to be served consecutively with his existing sentence. At 55 years total, it was effectively a life sentence that would ensure he died in prison, unable to harm another woman directly or through surrogates. As I left the courtroom that day, I felt a sense of closure that had been missing since Rebecca's first phone call had revealed the truth about my marriage. The legal system had finally held Michael accountable, not just for his crimes against me, but for the systematic predation that had defined his entire adult life. The media coverage of the trial brought our story to national attention, leading to documentary features and television interviews that helped spread awareness about romance fraud beyond anything I could have imagined. The visibility was sometimes overwhelming, but I reminded myself that every story shared might prevent another woman from falling victim to similar deceptions. Emma, now 3 years old and blissfully unaware of the complicated circumstances of her conception, had become the light that guided every decision I made about how public to be with our story. I wanted her to grow up proud of her mother's strength and resilience, but I also wanted to protect her from the burden of her biological father's crimes. David Martinez had legally adopted Emma when she was 2, giving her the stable, loving father figure she deserved while erasing any legal connection to Michael Rodriguez. The adoption process had been straightforward given Michael's incarceration and the documented abuse, but the emotional significance was profound. Watching David teach Emma to ride her tricycle in our backyard, I marveled at how different, authentic love looked from the performed affection I'd experienced with Michael. David's patience with Emma's stubborn independence, his delight in her silly jokes, his willingness to read the same bedtime story 17 times because it was her favorite, all reflected genuine care rather than calculated manipulation. Our marriage had grown stronger through the challenges of the investigation and trials. David's unwavering support during the most difficult phases of seeking justice had proven that he was committed to our family's well-being without any hidden agenda. He'd taken vacation days to attend court hearings, held me while I cried after particularly difficult testimony, and never once suggested that my past was too complicated for him to handle. The support network Rebecca and I had created evolved into a formal nonprofit organization dedicated to educating people about romance fraud and providing resources for survivors. The organization, which we named Authentic Connections, offered everything from online support groups to legal advocacy to financial counseling for women whose lives had been devastated by criminal deception. 5 years after Michael's final sentencing, Authentic Connections had helped over 3,000 women recognize and escape fraudulent relationships. Our educational programs were being implemented in colleges, senior centers, and community organizations across the country. The research we'd funded had led to better understanding of the psychological techniques used by romance fraudsters and more effective methods for helping survivors heal from their trauma. Rebecca had returned to school to become a licensed therapist specializing in trauma recovery, using her experience as a survivor to help other women rebuild their sense of self after systematic manipulation. Her practice had a waiting list of clients seeking someone who truly understood the unique challenges of recovering from elaborate romantic deception. Michelle had written a book about her experience that became a bestseller, bringing national attention to the issue of romance fraud while providing hope for other survivors. Her speaking engagements at conferences and universities helped educate people about the warning signs of predatory behavior in relationships. Anna had developed a smartphone app that helped people verify the identities of potential romantic partners, using sophisticated algorithms to detect discrepancies in online profiles and social media presence. The app had prevented countless women from falling victim to the same types of elaborate deceptions we'd all experienced. Amanda, despite being the most recent victim, had become one of our most effective advocates. Her background in healthcare gave her credibility when speaking to professional organizations about the medical and psychological impacts of romance fraud. Her testimony had been instrumental in securing federal funding for victim services and prevention programs. Our annual Survivor Conference had grown from a small gathering of a dozen women to a national event attended by hundreds of survivors, their families, law enforcement professionals, and mental health advocates. The conference provided a space for healing and education while continuing to build the network of support that had been so crucial to all our recoveries. At this year's conference, I was scheduled to deliver the keynote address about the importance of trusting our instincts while remaining open to authentic love. Preparing for the speech, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that first devastating phone call from Rebecca. The woman who had answered that call had been naive, but kind, trusting, but unaware of how that trust could be weaponized against her. The woman preparing to address hundreds of survivors had learned to balance openness with wisdom, vulnerability with strength, love with self-protection. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience filled with women who had survived elaborate deceptions and found the courage to rebuild their lives, I felt profound gratitude for the circuitous path that had led me to this moment. Without Michael's betrayal, I might never have discovered the depths of my own resilience or connected with this incredible community of survivors. Every one of us in this room has something in common, I began my speech. We've all experienced the devastating realization that someone we loved never actually existed. We've all had to grieve not just the end of a relationship, but the death of a person who was entirely fictional. I spoke about the unique challenges of recovering from elaborate romantic deception, how it differed from other types of betrayal because it attacked the very foundations of our ability to trust our own perceptions. I shared strategies for rebuilding, confidence in our judgment while remaining open to authentic connections. The men who targeted us believed that by destroying our capacity for trust, they would leave us permanently damaged, I continued. They underestimated our strength, our resilience, and our ability to transform trauma into wisdom. They thought they were creating victims, but they actually created warriors. The standing ovation that followed my speech was not just for me, but for every woman in that room who had refused to let criminal deception define her future. We were living proof that it was possible to survive elaborate manipulation and build something beautiful from the wreckage. After the conference, David and I took Emma to the San Antonio Zoo, one of her favorite places. Watching her fearlessly approach the giraffe exhibit, chattering excitedly about the animals she was seeing, I marveled at her confidence and curiosity. Despite the complicated circumstances of her beginning, Emma was growing up secure in the bay. knowledge that she was loved unconditionally by people who would always tell her the truth. That evening, as I tucked Emma into bed with her favorite stuffed elephant, she looked up at me with David's kind eyes and asked, "Mama, why do you help sad ladies feel better?" I considered how to explain my work in terms a 3-year-old could understand. "Sometimes people get hurt by someone they trusted," I said carefully. "I help them remember that they're strong and brave, and that there are good people in the world who will love them the right way." Emma nodded solemnly as if this made perfect sense to her. "Like how Daddy loves us the right way." "Exactly like that, sweetheart." As I turned off her bedroom light and closed the door, I realized that Emma had articulated something profound in her simple observation. The difference between authentic love and manipulative performance wasn't complicated. It was just the difference between someone who loved us for who we were versus someone who loved what they could get from us. David was waiting in our living room with 2 cups of tea and a smile that still made my heart skip after 4 years of marriage. We sat together on our couch, his arm around my shoulders, planning Emma's upcoming birthday party and discussing our vacation plans for the summer. These quiet moments of domestic contentment felt miraculous to me, not because they were extraordinary, but because they were genuine. There were no hidden agendas in David's affection, no calculated manipulation in his interest in my day, no performance in his laughter at my terrible jokes. The life I'd built with David and Emma wasn't perfect, but it was real. We argued about household chores and worried about Emma's daycare adjustment and struggled with work-life balance like any normal family. The difference was that our challenges were authentic problems to be solved together, not manufactured crises designed to increase emotional dependence. As I prepared for bed that night, I checked my email and found a message from a woman named Sarah Chen who had attended the conference. She thanked me for my speech and shared that my story had given her the courage to report her own experience with romance fraud to law enforcement. "I thought I was the only person stupid enough to fall for such elaborate lies," she wrote. "Hearing your story made me realize that I wasn't stupid. I was targeted by someone who studied how to exploit my capacity for love. Thank you for helping me see the difference." Reading her message, I felt the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that sharing my painful experience had helped another woman reclaim her sense of self-worth. Every speech I gave, every interview I participated in, every time I relived the trauma of discovering Michael's deception was worthwhile if it prevented even one woman from suffering the same devastation. Michael Rodriguez had tried to destroy my ability to love and trust, but his crimes had inadvertently led me to a life filled with more authentic love and meaningful connections than I could have imagined. The community of survivors I'd found, the marriage I'd built with David, the daughter I was raising to be strong and discerning, the work I was doing to protect other women, all of it had grown from the ashes of his betrayal. The man who had believed he could reduce me to a victim had instead created someone far stronger and more purposeful than the woman he'd originally targeted. His greatest failure wasn't getting caught. It was his complete inability to understand that the capacity for love that made his victims vulnerable was also the source of their ultimate strength. As I drifted off to sleep beside David, with Emma's soft breathing audible through the baby monitor, I felt profound gratitude for the unexpected path that had led me to this moment. The journey had been painful and terrifying, but it had also revealed reserves of courage and resilience I'd never known I possessed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new women to help, new opportunities to turn trauma into triumph. But tonight, I was simply a woman lying next to her husband, listening to her daughter sleep peacefully, surrounded by the kind of authentic love that no predator could ever replicate or destroy. The phone call that had changed everything had, indeed, transformed my life, but not in the way Rebecca or I could have predicted when she first reached out with her devastating news. Instead of destroying my faith in love, Michael's betrayal had taught me to recognize the difference between performance and authenticity, between manipulation and genuine care. I was no longer the naive woman who had fallen for elaborate lies. But I was also not the bitter, cynical person Michael had intended to create. I was someone who had learned to love wisely, to trust carefully, and to protect fiercely while remaining open to the beautiful possibilities that authentic connections could offer. The legacy of Michael Rodriguez's crimes would not be a trail of broken women afraid to love again. Instead, it would be a network of survivors who had transformed their pain into purpose, their trauma into strength, their betrayal into wisdom that would protect countless other women from suffering the same fate. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.